Hello and welcome to the Holyrood Sources podcast, where we take you inside Scottish politics. I'm Calum Macdonald. Hello. And this is Geoff Aberdein, who was Chief of Staff to the First Minister Alex Salmond. Hello, Geoff.
Good morning.
And Andy Maciver, who was Director of Communications for the Scottish Conservatives. Hello, Andy.
Good morning.
The focus of our podcast today will be speaking to Lord Malcolm Offord, who will tell us how he thinks Scotland can be made healthier and wealthier, which is exciting. We look forward to both of those things happening. Malcolm's ideas coming up on the podcast in just a minute. You can watch all of this on YouTube, of course. Just search for Holyrood Sources, where you will get full episodes to enjoy. Press subscribe there. It's totally free. And if this is the first time you're with us on the podcast, subscribe on whatever app you're listening on, Spotify, on Apple, or elsewhere. And as you're listening, share your thoughts, your ideas, or your questions. You can WhatsApp us on 0333 404 6507. Now, we're going to start with probably a one-off feature called Good Week, Bad Week. Good week potentially for John Swinney. Bad week certainly for Sir Keir Starmer. Do you like that? Over the past couple of weeks, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer's premiership.
So I like the features that you introduced without telling Geoff and I, Callum. It's good. Another feature that Geoff and I have never heard of.
You leave the creativity to me. You leave the creativity to me. You guys just say things. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer's premiership has been moving from one crisis to the next. His deputy, Angela Rayner, was forced to resign over tax issues. Ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson, Lord Mandelson, was sacked because of new evidence of how close he was with convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Starmer himself is under scrutiny for defending Mandelson, even as concerns were rising and intensifying. There is real dissatisfaction within the Labour Party. And by contrast, perhaps, First Minister John Swinney's enjoyed a good week. He's launched a new furlough scheme. Bus manufacturer Alexander Dennis says it's going to keep its Scottish sites open after the Scottish Government pledged £4 million towards the wage bill for workers there. Also, of course, he was in Washington, D.C., pushing for lower tariffs on Scotch whisky. President Trump is here this week for his unprecedented second state visit. Andy, what a couple of weeks it has been. Would you like to embrace the good week, bad week format and just break it down a bit for us?
I don't have much choice, really, do I? Because
this is why I don't tell you in advance.
We're recording now. Yes, I'm presuming, yes, Starmer obviously being in the bad week category and Swinney in the good week category. Yeah, Swinney has had a good week. There's no doubt about that. What comes of the trade deal will remain to be seen, because obviously, as Swinney has repeatedly said, it is in the hands of the UK government now, not in his own hands. He certainly did a pretty good job in Washington and at his press conference the day after he got back of selling the narrative that whisky was not really properly on the table before he put it on there. That will be debated, I'm quite sure, by UK Labour, but that's certainly the narrative that he sold. I think more interestingly is actually how well he worked all this behind the scenes and just how long this exercise has been going on for, of him wooing the Trump family, starting with his sons, going through the visit that Trump made here, the particularly unique gifts that Swinney gave related to Trump's mum and Stornoway and so on. And obviously he's done a very good diplomatic job here, actually, perhaps even better than Peter Mandelson. So, I mean, I think that for sure Swinney's had a good week in the Alexander Dennis stuff. I mean, it's probably debatable from an economic perspective whether that's all a good idea, but I suppose that's for a different podcast. Politically, it was a good week for sure. Starmer, I mean, I don't know what Geoff thinks. Starmer, I think you can ride out things like Rayner, financial scandals, tax scandals, that happens in all governments. I just feel that if it can be proved that Starmer knew a lot more than he says he did about Mandelson's relationship with the most famous paedophile in the world, I think he's in bother, to be honest with you.
To say the least.
Andy, I would use the word infamous, not famous, I think, when you're talking about Jeffrey Epstein. Yeah, it's. I've got a couple of thoughts on this, actually. Yes, clearly it has been a more positive week for John Swinney. The juxtaposition of him intervening on whisky, intervening on Alexander Dennis, whilst his principal opponents in the Labour Party down south are in disarray, and the optics of that will not be lost on the electorate. Let's put it that way. That said, I do want to make a point, though. The problems with Alexander Dennis were known some time ago. The problems with Grangemouth were known some time ago. And we get to this position just now in our body politic where we wait for the worst to happen before we act, and then have to cost more taxpayers' money. I'd like to see more proactive interventions to try and secure the long-term viability of these companies, these institutions, as opposed to us having to react knee-jerk fashion and have to put money aside. That said, it has been a good week for John Swinney. As I said last week, this mantra of standing up for Scotland is now starting to get a little bit more evidence base behind it. On Starmer, I watched the interview with, I think it was Gary Gibbon, and you could see him getting pretty rattled. I think it's important to remember, in his defence, he wasn't staying on Epstein Island and he was not staying in Epstein's apartment in New York. Can we just get a bit of perspective? But that said, it's the old classic. What did you know and when? You know, the killer is in the cover-up and all the rest of it. So we'll have to find out what he did actually know, and maybe that'll be forthcoming today in the Commons. But I now view, I said it last week, I speculated that if May did not go Labour's way and they had tough results, I think Starmer's in a sticky wicket. I think that now is a certainty. I still think he's got time, notwithstanding what he knew and when about Epstein and Mandelson, but I think May is now his crunch point in terms of his tenure as Prime Minister. There's no doubt about that.
And Burnham could be in the Commons by May as well, which will just massively
this is an interesting thing. So we were chatting about this on the radio station over the weekend, and whether Andy Burnham actually, whether there is a kind of legitimacy to his claim to the throne, to big up the King of the North metaphor that's often applied to him. And there's something of a feeling, I think, among some, that almost the idea, the perception of Andy Burnham is better than the reality, insofar as he's tried for the Labour leadership a couple of times, and both times been found wanting, albeit he was largely respected as a UK government minister.
Yeah, I just one thing I find interesting about this, listen, Burnham comes across really well, but it's a different ballgame being a mayor of Greater Manchester to being Prime Minister. But, you know, the only way to really manoeuvre this is to have a by-election.
Yeah.
And are Labour confident of winning a by-election in Greater Manchester just now against reform? Not sure. Could be the biggest risk for Andy Burnham. One more just very quick observation how bad things are for Keir Starmer just now. You know, Robert Peston last night, Ed Miliband was fielded, big Secretary of State, to try and defend Keir Starmer. And after the questioning around the Mandelson affair, it quickly got to the point where they said, well, actually, but Keir Starmer doesn't even want you in the position you're in. You were sacked. You were asked to be moved on, weren't you, to housing? And then he had to defend that line of questioning. So it's so bad that the people they're fielding to defend Keir Starmer are themselves subject to some sort of much lesser controversy. And if it gets to that stage, you can't even field folk that can defend your record because of something that you might have done to them recently. You're in real deep shtuck. So we'll have to see how that all manifests itself.
The other thing as well worth mentioning, just to close off the Burnham question, you know, Labour are in a situation where their backbenchers won't let them cut spending, their manifesto won't let them raise tax, and there's no growth. So whether you're Keir Starmer or Andy Burnham or Harry Houdini, you're not getting out of it.
The other question, I suppose, Andy, just very quickly, is around what this does for perceptions of Labour, and I suppose by extension, Scottish Labour and Anas Sarwar. Jeff's mentioned that elections in May could be a real flashpoint for the Labour Party. One pollster, Scarlett Maguire from Merlin Strategy, suggested that things like the Epstein-Mandelson scandal, it's not necessarily the nitty-gritty detail that connects with people, but actually it's this perception that all politicians are the same, that nothing has changed, that none of them can be trusted, they're all in it for themselves, and they're all watching each other's backs, not mine, as a member of the public. That is something that can spread, is it not? That is something that can loop in and encircle Anas Sarwar and Scottish Labour too.
Yeah, well, it absolutely does. It encircles, I think, all mainstream parties, and that's why Nigel Farage has won, I think, 98 of the last 100 polls. It's not because everybody who's voting for or says they're going to vote for Nigel Farage are right-wing or from whatever pejorative term you want to use. They're just annoyed with mainstream politicians. It's a disaffected vote. It's not a right-wing vote. And I think that ultimately is Starmer's problem. And you can see what is happening with Starmer and Kemi Badenoch is that they are both chasing Farage. So Starmer's talking about immigration all the time. Badenoch's talking about net zero all the time, and they're not doing that because they think it's because they want to. They're doing that because they know that's what Farage is talking about, and that's how Farage is taking their votes. the difficulty is when you chase the sort of authentic originator of those sentiments and try to copy him, nobody buys it. And that's exactly what we're seeing with polls at the moment.
Perhaps we're going to talk with our guest, Malcolm Offord, about this particular aspect. But there's one final point I'd like to make in this. This country needs growth badly, right? It just needs it. And the Labour Party are afforded the luxury here of another 4 years in government. They have got time to not be short-termist and make some pretty important interventions to try and incentivise growth in our economy. That is the route to electoral success, in my opinion. If people feel more comfortable in their pocket, they'll feel more comfortable voting for you as a result of that. And I just saw one briefing from the weekend, which was in the Times, Sunday Times. Rachel Reeves plans to scrap VAT on energy to lower bills. It is, she said, all options are on the table, it is understood, which includes lowering the 5% VAT rate on domestic energy bills to zero. This would save consumers about £86 a year. The nation rejoices as our consumers face £7.20 a month off their bills. That ain't going to get it done, guys. I'm sure that will help those most impoverished in our society. I get that. But that ain't going to shift the dial politically for you. And they do still have time to really radically change approach and try and incentivise growth in the economy. They should take it, because right now what they're doing, it clearly ain't working.
Growth will feature in the part of our next conversation then with Lord Offord, Shadow Energy Minister for the Conservative Party, of course. He's launched his report, Wealthy Nation, Healthy Nation, considering Scotland's performance in devolved areas since the Scottish Parliament was re-established in 1999. He focuses on health, education and the economy and explores what reforms and policies could help Scotland become the wealthiest, healthiest and best educated part of the UK. Malcolm Offord is with us now. Malcolm, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good morning, all.
It's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Andy's spoken on this podcast before about a kind of new chapter for devolution. Here we are, just over 25 years through. Does your report suggest that this is a good chance, that now is a good time to sort of take stock, to evolve the Scottish Parliament and what it's doing?
Yes, I fundamentally believe that. I believe in devolution. I believe in the concept of pushing power down to local people. And I think a review, it's perfectly reasonable to have a review at 25 years. That's a milestone. It's a jubilee, right? So you have a review, right? And you look at it and say, has this worked in terms of outcomes? The only thing that matters to me is outcomes over ideology, right? Are our people healthier and wealthier, better off, more prosperous as a result of the last 25 years? And I think a fairly sort of objective view of all the sort of what we call the KPIs, if you look at our health sector, it looks like our outcomes are down, not up. We've got 900,000 Scots on a waiting list, 100,000 waiting for more in a year. If you look at our our education system, once the best in the world, it looks like, in terms of outputs, that we've fallen right down in terms of standards, in terms of international standards. And in terms of economy, it looks like we've been running, certainly in the last 10 years, something called a welfare economy, which does not create wealth, which does not create growth. And for me, that is, as a Scot, I find that embarrassing. I don't see why we should be running our economy at a lower rate than England.
Has this been a sort of new issue in recent years, or is there a sort of traceable slow decline in these measures over the 25 years of devolution?
I think there has been I think there was a marked shift when the Salmond era moved to the Sturgeon era, I have to say, because I would say that over the whole 25 years, we've either had Labour, Lib Dem, or Scottish National effectively policies. Now, what I say in my paper is the reason why it's called Wealthy Nation, Healthy Nation is the Wealth of Nations, written by a Scots guy, Adam Smith, right, still outsells Milton Friedman and Keynes 3-1. So the people in the world want to read this guy. What is he saying, right? What does he say? Now, he's been hijacked by people over the years, especially Gordon Brown, because they're both born in Kirkcaldy. But what Adam Smith said was there's different ways to deliver society. It's not all just done by the state, right? Now, we have had basically social democrat ideology in all those parties of government. Let me give you just some easy numbers. When devolution started, the size of the state against GDP, which is a measure we use to measure how big the state spending is, in 1999 was 43%, right? GERS just published in August, that number is 52%, and 55% if you exclude oil, right? So we've gone on a 25-year experiment of, if there's a problem, the way to solve it, throw money at it. Right? We've gone from 43% to 55%. Now, if you compare that with take New Zealand, same size, same population. New Zealand is at 42%. Norway, our much lauded neighbour, same population, 46%. Sweden, 48%. We have done an experiment from basically centre-left, social democrat. If there is a problem, the way to fix it is throw money at the problem. And Adam Smith says there's other ways to deliver services than just the state. And that's what I think we need to have a conversation about going forward.
Let's turn into some of the specific areas then. And actually, I want to start on energy, if I may, because we had our energy special on this podcast a couple of weeks ago in Aberdeen. Clearly, this is a policy area of interest to you in your role at Westminster. One of the themes of our special a couple of weeks ago was about trying to get politicians to consider whether renewables and oil and gas can exist together. Why is it often presented as a kind of binary choice? You've got to choose one. You've got to decline one and raise the other. What's your take on how Scotland's energy transition and how the UK's energy transition is actually functioning right now?
Well, the first thing to say is it's not just. I mean, I wish people just stop using this word just transition. I mean, the word I want to use is affordable transition. Right? We do need a transition. There's no question that we do want to get ourselves a more balanced energy system, and that over the long term, we need to wean ourselves off hydrocarbons. We'll never be free, and we should not be free of hydrocarbons ever, but we do need to have some sort of balanced, cleaner energy system. However, it's about how you get there, right? And at the moment, if you want to talk to the folks in the Northeast, or you want to talk to people in Grangemouth, and you use the word just, they say you're having a laugh. This isn't just. I know the UK have just come out with stats that said that the much vaulted transition of jobs from North Sea technicians to wind farm technicians is only running at 58%. And these are at salaries that are 2/3 of what they had before. So this is not just. So can we just stop using the word just, and we can start talking about how we make this affordable?
I thought you were going to say there, Malcolm, sorry, I could come in, Calum, but there's actually more pressing stats that have just been published today. Carried, I think I was in Telegraph yesterday, but essentially the NSTA, the North Sea Transition Authority, which reports directly to Ed Miliband, has cut its estimate for output between 2025 and 2050 by 124 million tonnes of oil equivalent. That works out at 920 million barrels, which is more than £50 billion to the UK economy. £50 billion to the economy at a time that we're relying on more and more fossil fuel imports. It is absurd. But my point to you was not that. I was actually had a wry smile when you talked about Adam Smith. I mean, if I could, I'm not sure I could count on the fingers and toes of 100 people the amount of times we included a quote from Adam Smith in Alex Salmond's speeches. I mean, every time we went out and talked about the economy, he was an economist, of course, Alex Salmond, and just Adam Smith was his hero. So I think you've made a really important point, because I certainly remember working for a party and a government that sought to achieve economic interventions so that you didn't have to spend more money. Going back to our other point, don't get me wrong, we had some very social democratic policies on universal support for various initiatives, but his guiding light was achieving economic growth and letting businesses do that for you. That was his big point. And I think we've lost that. I have to say, in the intervening years, we've lost that mantra. And this, I don't know how you put it, so I don't want to misquote you, but I think it's just throwing money at everything, I think has really destabilised, I believe, what a Scottish Parliament should do. It should forensically analyse where the largest fiscal levers are, which is at Westminster, and work out how it can adopt better measures to do that. All that said, and I want to ask you this question, and I know I've said a lot, so I'll shut up now, but, what's your views in this paper and your analysis? Because obviously the Scottish Parliament, give or take, is responsible for 60% of public spending, but then only 40% of total revenue. Do you believe, Malcolm, that this should be more equitable? Do you think that the Scottish Parliament should have more responsibility for generating more revenue and then perhaps becoming more mature as a parliament, as an institution?
Well, in an ideal world, yes, but it's certainly chicken and egg, because you've got to earn the right, I think, to get that. If you're talking about having more sort of tax raising powers at the moment, that couldn't be justified, because on the basis of what's going on at the moment, certainly in the Sturgeon era, where I grant you that Alex Salmond did actually understand the economy, And he actually was interested in what I would call jobs, work, and growth, whereas the words being used in the last 10 years have been welfare and taxes. Welfare, everybody needs welfare, but the best welfare I can give you is a good job.
Yeah.
All right. So can we please start talking about how we get people back to work? And that is fundamentally to do with education, skills and training. It doesn't need to be university. It can be college-based. If you look at the sectors that Scotland has got world-leading positions in, it's actually a really exciting time to be coming out of school as a Scottish kid if you get yourself trained up and skilled. I mean, if you were to go through whether it's obviously financial services, we're strong financial services. Creative industries, we're massive in that. Energy, we've talked about, is a world-class industry for Scotland. Life and agri-sciences, food and drink, and advanced manufacturing. Just look at all these the orders coming to the shipyards on the Clyde and Rosai. We've got world-class industries in Scotland, and yet we're not getting our kids trained up and skilled to take advantage of that. If we can get them skilled and trained, they can become wealthy and healthy. And the result of that is we collect more tax. The result of that, we can look after the people who are really genuinely vulnerable, and people have a better life, less mental health issues, and a more prosperous society. And I think at the moment, we've got the levers in Holyrood, the Scottish Parliament have the levers in Holyrood to deliver that part of the equation and make UK the most prosperous part, of the UK.
In terms of some of the other specifics on health and education and things, you talked about education there, Malcolm. Why has Scotland's performance in PISA, these international education assessments, why has it dropped significantly over the past 25 years?
Look, I think there's a lot of ideology in this, and I think we have to take on the fact that it's very centralised, it's very bureaucratic, and frankly, there's a big union position in this as well, understandably. Now, at the end of the day, the best run school in Scotland is Jordan Hill College School, right? And it's in Glasgow, and it's basically run by an independent board of governors. It's a state school, but it is allowed to make its own decisions, and it gets on and does that, and it sets an example for an alternative model to the one we have at the moment, where one size fits all. And, at the end of the day, Curriculum for Excellence was a very good mission statement. You wouldn't disagree with that, Curriculum for Excellence, would you? But what you see is massive disparity, especially in socioeconomic areas, where you're getting different outcomes. And for me, that says, this is back to the idea, the only way to deliver this is through the state. Well, no, actually, there's other ways to deliver this, which can be very cost effective. We need to look at other models. And one of the things we need to reintroduce to our system is testing and assessment to make sure that we are measuring what we're learning, to make sure our kids coming out can get access to these jobs I've just described to you.
Yeah.
Do you know, it's really interesting. I've been sitting listening to this, and I heard Malcolm talk about this over the last few weeks as well as part of the Wealthy Nation, Healthy Nation project. And I think it's interesting when you listen to the conversation Malcolm and Geoff have just had, because it's not really a lot that they disagree on. And I think what that shows us is that we can agree across constitutional boundaries.
You're going to get me into bother here.
I know I am going to get into bother. I'm probably going to get Malcolm in more bother than you, but that just illustrates the point, though, doesn't it? Is that actually it's notable when we have people who have different views on the Constitution agreeing on so much, and it actually shouldn't be all that difficult, because what we're talking about here is trying to make Scotland better. For me, it's a little bit too unusual to hear a unionist talking about wanting Scotland to be better than England. Whereas I think that's quite a normal thing. Like, you'd want Scotland to be better than England at sport, even if you were a unionist. So why would you not want Scotland to be better than England at health and education and the economy and so on? So, I mean, I think it's really refreshing to hear all this. And as I say, I've been listening to Malcolm articulate this over the last couple of weeks, and it's been good to hear. I think, though, if you look at, you've said, Calum, what's gone wrong here.
Yeah.
And I think the reality is that both sides have talked about the Constitution so much for the last 15 years, there has just been no space to talk about policy. And it is relatively, we've been doing this podcast for 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. For a lot of people on it, pretty much every leading politician in the country has been on the podcast. How much actual detailed policy thought do they have as a collective body of people in the Scottish Parliament? Not enough. Not enough. So as we've been spending all our time talking about the Constitution, talking about all these things, that is when our education system has slipped significantly down the European rankings, down the world rankings according to PISA. I mean, slipping all the time. And we're not noticing. We're not paying attention to it It's happening in the background because in the foreground, we're talking about other things. And I think, not to say we should stop talking about constitutional issues and the transfer of taxation powers and that sort of thing. I think there should be an ongoing conversation, but not at the expense of talking about the real things that are actually impacting us really very significantly in the country at the moment.
But
I mean, the thing for me, Andy, is that the debate on education for me is that the people that hurts the most are the people who need the most help, right? If you go to my town of Greenock, my hometown of Greenock, I was down there last week. I went to a prize giving at Cliveview Academy. It was one of the most uplifting things I've been to in recent memory, right? All these kids coming up, getting the prizes, not just academic, a lot of music talent, a lot of creative arts talent, sports talent. You've got a lot of talent in this town, right? And yet, if I look at the stats that come out on for example, employment in Greenock, 40% of adults in Greenock are not working. Okay, now 5% are listed as unemployed seeking a job. 5% are listed as being adult carers. That means there's 30% of people who are economically inactive, most of whom are on sick pay. There's a lot of talent there that we are not accessing. We've got to get our people back to work. We've got to have in-work, in-life training, because we've got all these industries coming through where there's really, really good jobs, and we need to help our people get into work, and that's about skills and training, and that's really what I'm passionate about.
On to health, I think, as well, just to give this a bit of focus. So the Scottish Government's got its NHS recovery plan and an operational improvement plan as well, looking at things like capacity, at backlog reduction, and at service renewal, and also this kind of lingering idea of health and social care integration as well. Does that tally, Malcolm, with what you think needs to be done?
Yeah, so on health, what's really interesting is the paper we put together is actually written by six doctors, 6 distinguished consultants who are actually inside the NHS. So this is not my opinion, this is their opinion. And they are very dedicated professionals who are saying that the system is not running well enough. They're sitting inside the NHS, they love the NHS, but they say it could do much, much better. And what they're saying is the system is not focused enough on patient outcomes. It's not focused enough on it's too ideological about how to deliver that, rather than saying how do we just get the best outcome for patients. And they're saying that as a result of that, the morale is low. We're struggling to recruit junior doctors within Scotland. I mean, God, we're the country that invented doctors, right? We gave doctors to the world, right? If you look at the intake for Glasgow and Edinburgh med schools, it's still 11 to 1 places. But if you look at the Scottish allocation, it's almost less than 1 to 1 now. What's happening? Why are we not producing our own doctors? The ones that we do produce, why are they all going to Australia? Right? We need to look at that and say there's something wrong here. And what the practitioners are saying is that we need to focus on how the money flows. We all want healthcare to be affordable for everybody. I mean, the quote from Anaya Bevan was quite interesting. He said, "No society can legitimately call itself civilized if a sick person is denied medical aid because of a lack of means." Right? That is the founding principle of the NHS. So we're not changing the founding principle. What we're saying is that the system at the moment isn't working and it could be changed, but we need to break through the ideology, same as with education, same as some of the union positions. There's only one way of doing it. The state way is the only way. We need to think about other solutions, because we've gone from 43% of spending to 55% of spending, and we're not better, we're not more healthy, and we're not better educated. Can we please spend the next 25 years thinking about some other ways of doing this stuff?
Malcolm, do you? I'm just intrigued. You've done this body of work. You're clearly very passionate about it. I mean, where does this go? Are you going to speak to John Swinney? Are you going to speak to Anna Sarwar and say, look, we need to start thinking about this stuff, guys? I mean,
Yeah.
how does this get taken forward? Genuinely,
Well,
I'm not trying to be facetious. I'm very interested because we need, whether we agree or not, the point is you need to start having a discourse around these issues.
Geoff, I agree with that, and that's why this work has been done through an independent think tank, Centre for Policy Studies. And at the end of the day, this is up for grabs. This is a start of, who knows, this might end up doing more papers. I'm thinking maybe do one on energy. We should certainly do one on welfare. There's things we can do here in policy. And in a way, let's have a conversation about this. If these ideas are good, can we take them on and stop arguing about ideologies and work out how we make Scotland more prosperous? That's the only thing that matters to me. What was that guy? It was that Harry Truman that said, it's amazing. You can change the world if you don't mind who takes the credit, right?
Yeah.
If these are good ideas, can we just get on with them, and can we gather around them, and can we make Holyrood a place of intelligent conversation, of challenging thought, of curiosity of mind, where where everyone's not thinking the same? Is it what it said? When everyone's thinking the same, no one's thinking, right? Can we please have Holyrood become almost like a laboratory of ideas, of innovation? Let's try it. Oh, it didn't work. Well, let's try something else, see if that works. To me, that is what Holyrood should. Holyrood's got all the power at the moment to do that, but instead is obsessed with this continual wrangle about the Constitution, and it's obsessed with this continual ideology. The only way to sort something out is for the state to spend money.
But let me come in on the Constitution point, because this frustrates me somewhat as well, because the SNP get labelled obsessing over independence. Well, who knew? That was what the Scottish National Party believe in. But fundamentally, for that conversation just to stop, that discussion, that back and forth, there needs to be an agreed process. There needs to be an agreed process from the UK government that says, if this metric is met, we will have a referendum. And then that allows the space for the conversations that you want to have take place in earnest. But without that, and this continual kind of, you're not getting it, now's not the time, oh, it's a generation and all this. But well, actually, by the end of the next Parliament, there'll be people born, not born yet, that will be able to vote in that referendum. Sorry, that weren't born in the 2014 referendum, excuse me. So we need to have that agreed process, surely. And that is a priority for both sides of this debate. Otherwise, the wrangling will continue.
Well, I would say to that Alex Salmond got his referendum because he earned the right to get one, right? He won a majority in Holyrood, and he ran a good administration on the whole, and he was able to demonstrate that he was able to create, that there was growth. I mean, if you look at the growth rate of Scotland under his administration, it was a higher growth rate, right? And it was an 84% turnout, Geoff. I mean, that is the highest turnout. I mean, people around the world were studying this in political science all over the world. This was the highest turnout of any vote except Australia, where it's compulsory to vote. So the Scots were engaged in this conversation. 3.6 million of them voted, 2 million to stay, 1.6 million to remain. That is a decisive result, and Salmond knew it, and that's why he made his comment about that's for a generation, right? Now, if I had been Alex Salmond and I'd got the vote from 30 to 45%, I would have been entitled, I think, to say I'm handing over to Sturgeon. She can get it from 45 to 60%, right? And you're part of that journey. But that hasn't happened, and that hasn't happened because we've had a government which has not been interested in growth, and we've had a welfare economy with flatlined. And guess what? The polls are flatlined. So therefore, it's not. You can't have the conversation because you haven't earned the right. Yeah,
so no.
My view would be earn the right to do it.
Yes, but you see what I'm getting at here. This is your opinion. Salmond earned the right. Some would disagree with that. I agree with it for what it's worth. David Cameron agreed to the consented process through the Edinburgh Agreement. My point is not that. If John Swinney wins a majority next year and in the elections, does Starmer just say, well, now's not the time? Can I help? It's not feasible. It's not. You need to allow the conversations that you want to happen, and frankly, I want to happen in the Scottish Parliament. We must have an agreed way of understanding how this country can be independent. Otherwise, this will just continue to dominate our discourse. And it can't be, I'm afraid, because you think or I think that Salmond earned the right back then. There's got to be an actual process, because that's rather subjective, I just feel that we'll have to have an agreed process to allow it to happen. So what is that metric? What is that measure to allow another referendum to happen?
Well, one indication is the public right now have got no interest in that, because the public right now want better health, better education, and a better economy. So go figure. Let's give them better health, better education, better economy, and we can come back to that maybe at some point, but not right now. Let's not talk about this. Can we just talk about making Scotland prosperous, healthy, and wealthy? And then, by all means, we'll have another conversation at that point, but that's not for now.
As an extension of that, Malcolm, I think you've alluded to this in conversation. Does the current, if I can put it like this, the current status of devolution make sense? Do the correct powers and to the correct extent reside at Holyrood in order for the case to be made, perhaps, or in order for health and wealth to improve?
I would say that it's a pretty fair balance if you look at Schedule 5 between the reserve matters and the non-reserve matters. What I find frustrating is that Holyrood spends its whole time talking about reserve matters instead of the non-reserve matters.
Yeah.
And my view on this would be that if you want to get promoted in your job, what do? You do a good job. Your boss says, well done, I'll give you more responsibility. So, I mean, it's pretty simple, right?
Yeah.
So if Holyrood actually got on with the day job of using the powers it's got to demonstrate, and here's the other thing. Here's the thing that actually really does frustrate me. It's not to say that England is working that well, right? It's not to say that London is working that well. If Scotland were to set an example, isn't that the whole point of being Scottish? We set an example of how to do things well, right? If we were able to set an example with 5.5 million people, with our own levers of power that we can control over the things that we manage, can we not show how to make devolution work? Make our part of the UK the best. The English folk will be queuing up for that, right? So why can't we just do that ourselves within our parliament and make it an exemplar, and the rest will follow, right?
But within that, there are some ideas for how things might change. For example, I think you're proposing reforms to the Barnett formula so it's more transparent. And one that's also eye-catching, a suggestion, I think, for a dedicated Bank of England Deputy Governor for Scotland to sort of boost Scotland's presence as a kind of financial centre.
So these are both ideas that came from the economist who wrote the economic piece called Gerald Lyons. And I actually went to him. He's based in London. I actually went to him because I wanted an outside view of a respected economist looking at Scotland from the outside looking in. So I wouldn't necessarily, these are not, and he says in his paper, these are purely economic ideas, but they've got political ramifications. These are not my political ideas of the Barnett formula of the Bank of England.
Sure.
But isn't that the point? That he's throwing out some interesting ideas that we can debate, and don't we want more of this, basically?
Do you know, I'm sitting here relatively quietly today, enjoying listening to Geoff and Malcolm, actually having the sort of conversation that we should have. We should be having these sorts of conversations, and an intelligent, sparring conversation, but one that's conducted in a much more civilised way and an intellectual way than a lot of what we've heard before. Let me kind of try and round a bit of it up. So I agree with Geoff. I think there needs to be a process, and I think actually people who believe in the UK, I think it's in their interests to create a process, because otherwise it stops looking like a voluntary union. So I actually think it's in the long-term interest of everybody who believes in the UK to make sure a process is in place. However, the one thing I would say, and this alludes to some of the comments Malcolm made, is that if I was an independence supporter, I don't think I'd want a referendum right now. I really don't think I'd want one right now. I would want a referendum under circumstances where it was really clear that the new country you were voting for was going to be much better than the country you were leaving. Better economy, better healthcare system, better education system. And the reality is right now it's not. So our NHS, and the doctors who wrote this paper in Malcolm's series of essays made this quite clear. Our NHS is performing more poorly than England, and the English NHS isn't performing very well either. Our education system is demonstrably poorer than England's, where in particular reading is actually going really quite well. And frankly, none of the economy throughout the whole of the UK is going particularly well, but Scotland's isn't any better than England's. I would want to be in a position, if I was a nationalist, where I'm saying, right, let's get us to the point where we're actually performing really well, and where we can say to people, you can make a positive choice for independence here, because look how good we are, look how well we're doing. And I suppose that John Swinney's actually put the Alex Salmond argument back on the table, because John Swinney has said if there's an SNP-only majority at next year's election, then we think we should be entitled to the same process as there was in 2011. I agree. I think if the SNP get a majority next year, there should absolutely be a referendum. I think that is democracy and there should be one. But I suppose my point would be, I'm not sure I'd want to fight that referendum right now, based on the metrics that we actually see in Scotland right now. I think I'd rather fight it in 5 or 10 years' time, when there's been a chance to actually make things substantially better than they are just now.
Yeah, I mean, if I may, events, dear boy, events. I mean, you say that, the John Swinney wouldn't want to fight a referendum right now. Well, if the UK government's still in the same position it is today, he'll want to fight one tomorrow, frankly.
Well, you don't want to wait for Farage to be PM. I mean, that's when you want to fight one, right?
But let me kind of tally off and finish off on from my perspective anyway on kind of both of your contributions. I've really enjoyed this discussion actually. The competence thing, the record thing, the point you're making there, Andy, and I think what Malcolm was making, in terms of earning the right. I must have mentioned it 100 times on this podcast, and I'll mention it 101 times that the biggest calling card we had going into that referendum, not the only, but the biggest, was the fact that the majority of Scots viewed us as a competent government. We didn't get everything right, but we were viewed as overall pretty damn good in government. That was our greatest strength going into that referendum. So I certainly agree with that premise. I just think you have to have an agreed process that isn't down to one or two other people's views on whether we've earned the right or whether it's viewed as a popular, competent government. It has to be tested in a clear, understood, consented process.
Malcolm, thank you so much for bringing your ideas to us. This is what this podcast is all about, and we're glad to hear from you. Just as a kind of concluding question, I suppose, have you got proposals for kind of measures of success, perhaps in the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Do we use the same measures as these essays have been based on now? Does even the kind of accountability metric need considered in all of this?
And will you come back into Parliament and throw these ideas about and put your money where your mouth is? Because I think we need people like you in Parliament, frankly.
So my proposal is to put a big billboard at Holyrood Sources, so everybody driving past and on the train, and on it there's a line of both economic growth of England and the economic growth of Scotland. And what we want to do as a country is get behind this project that says we're going to get a Scottish line going above the English line. And then you can also have your stats on health and your stats on education, but put them up for everyone to see, and it'll be a shared endeavour that we get that line above the English line. And do you know what? We could do that if we put our minds to it.
Do you know my one criticism of that? Yet again, central belt bias, Heart Hill services. What about the A90? I mean, ridiculous.
Well, if you guys made the A90 big enough, we could actually put one up there as well.
Malcolm Offord, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for your time.
Pleasure.